If you've ever been quietly judged by those who should have supported you, especially the ones who smile with wine in their hand while calling you less, this story might just find you where it still hurts. Subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, and leave a comment. Has your worth ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? It wasn't the first time they called me poor, but it was the first time they said it in front of everyone. We were at my wife's parents' house, a stately old home with marble floors and a grandfather clock that had probably outlived a few family secrets. The long oak dining table was dressed like it belonged in a magazine: crystal glasses, silver cutlery, candles that didn't need to be lit to feel expensive. I was at the end of the table, like always. Not quite in, but not excused either. And that's when her father, half smiling over his third glass of wine, leaned forward and said it. Well, at least our daughter didn't marry for money, right? A few chuckles, her mother added without missing a beat. She married for love. Clearly. More laughter. My wife shifted in her seat, uncomfortable, but silent. I sat there, holding my glass of water like it was the only thing keeping my dignity from tipping over. They didn't say it with malice. That's the cruelest part. They said it the way people say things they assume you'll be too polite to push back against. Like it was a joke, but it wasn't. It was a line, drawn with linen napkins and legacy. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I'd already made up my mind. What they didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that 2 days before, I had signed the final contract on a house. Not just a house, a home, modern, quiet, built on land I chose. Paid for with years of silent work they never asked about, and frankly, never cared to. It wasn't inherited. It wasn't gifted. It was earned. Brick by brick, night by night, deal by deal. I didn't wear it on my sleeve. I didn't talk about money because I was always too busy making it the hard way. While they judged my shoes, I invested in silence. While they scoffed at my job, I built things they never saw coming. I looked around that table, faces glowing under chandelier light, and thought, you really have no idea who you're sitting across from. And that was okay. They didn't need to know. Yet. That night in the car, my wife apologized. I should have said something. I looked at her hands. Small, twisting the ring I bought with savings from my first business contract. You didn't have to, I said gently. But thank you. We drove home in silence. But it wasn't cold. It was deciding. And somewhere between the quiet roads and the ticking turn signals, I decided I wouldn't say anything either. I'd just invite them. Soon. You. See, sometimes the most powerful answer to being laughed at is to never raise your voice, just raise your standards, and let the room change on its own. Part 2. The invitation. No one expected I waited exactly 3 weeks. Not out of strategy. Not out of bitterness. I waited because keys take time. Because furniture needs to arrive. Because the land needed to be walked barefoot at night, with the lights still off. Just me, the air, and the feeling of finally owning something no one could touch. The house sat quietly at the edge of town. Built into a slope, long glass walls wrapped around a garden that bloomed even in silence. Every line of it was intentional, not flashy, just clean, peaceful, mine. When I finally sent the invitation, I kept it simple. We'd love to host the next family dinner. Saturday, 6 p.m. Address below. Let us welcome you. I emailed it to her parents, CC'd her siblings. No subject line, no photos, no explanation. My wife read the message twice before hitting send. You sure? She asked. I nodded. She knew me well enough not to push. She had seen the hours, the missed calls, the unpaid invoices I chased for years. She'd seen the months I came home and told her, we're close. Not there yet, but close. This was there. Saturday came. I wore a black shirt, rolled sleeves, clean watch. The same one they'd once said looked like it came from a mall kiosk. It didn't. But even if it had, It still told time the same way. They arrived right on time, in their polished cars and neutral smiles. Her father stepped out first, buttoning his blazer like he expected a modest apartment and an overcooked roast. He didn't expect the gate, didn't expect the curved driveway, the path lit softly by ground-level LEDs, the front door that opened, with a silent sweep into a living room that faced a garden he didn't even notice at first. My wife opened the door. "Welcome," she said simply. They walked in slowly, their heels not yet sure what kind of floor they were standing on. Her mother looked up at the open ceiling. "This is lovely," she said, like the word got stuck halfway up her throat. Her sister wandered toward the back patio. Her brother took out his phone, already trying to act like he wasn't taking pictures. And her father? He said nothing. He walked the room slowly, hands behind his back like he was in a gallery, not a home. He glanced at the stone countertops, the subtle lighting, the bookshelf with no designer labels, just real books. I didn't rush to explain. I let the space speak. Dinner was already plated. Warm, simple, roasted sea bass with lemon herb butter. My wife set it down like it was any other night, like we'd always eaten like this. Because the truth was, we had. Just not in rooms with chandeliers. Everyone sat, except him. He stood for a while, looking around. Then finally, "This is yours?" I nodded. "All of it?" Another nod. I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not envy, not regret, just recognition. The first time he'd really looked at me in years. "You've done well," he said, his voice soft. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I passed him the wine Cabernet, a good bottle, not a showy one. He sat down. We ate. There were no jokes that night, no comments about salaries or shoes, no sideways digs wrapped in laughter. There was just silverware against plates and the sound of people chewing on a truth they hadn't tasted before. That maybe the one they dismissed had never needed their permission to be something after all. After dessert, my wife's mother stood beside the window, looking out at the soft-lit garden. She turned to me. "This must have taken years." It did. "And you didn't say anything." I didn't need to. She opened her mouth like she might say more, then stopped, nodded, walked quietly back to the couch. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore, because they weren't the reason I had built this. They were just the echo. The thing I had to grow past to hear myself again. When they left, her father shook my hand at the door, firm, 2 seconds longer than usual. "You're welcome to host again sometime," he said. And I knew what he meant. I just didn't need it. Inside, the house went quiet again. Not empty, not cold, just still. Wife leaned on the kitchen counter, smiling with something like disbelief. "You think they get it now?" she asked. I thought about it, then shook my head. Maybe. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. What matters? I looked around, at the walls we'd chosen, the table we ate at, the garden that bloomed without needing applause. "This," I said, "the fact that we never had to prove anything to become it." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. Fully. No one called me poor that night. No one ever would again. But the truth? I hadn't been poor when they said it. Just quiet. And now I had peace, paid in full. The week after the dinner, no one said much. No follow-up messages. No thank you notes. Just silence. The kind that doesn't sting but lingers. The kind people leave behind when they're adjusting their stories. I imagined the conversations they had in private. Her father in his study, trying to remember if he'd ever asked what I did for work. Her mother replaying every offhand comment she'd ever made about people who rent. Her siblings scrolling through Zillow, quietly trying to place a number on what they'd seen. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. Not in that old way, because I hadn't built that house to prove them wrong. I built it to remind myself, was right to believe in the quiet road I chose. There's a moment that comes when you no longer flinch at being underestimated. When you no longer crave the applause from the people who never clapped in the first place. When you stop needing to be invited because you've built something no one can exclude you from. I felt that moment settle in my bones that week. It was subtle. The way I stood a little taller at the gas station, the way I turned down a consulting offer, not because I couldn't use the money, but because I no longer wanted to explain myself to people who paid with condescension, and the way I saw my wife one morning, standing barefoot in our kitchen, holding her coffee in both hands, staring out the window into the garden we had planted together. No makeup, no expectations, just peace. That's when I knew we hadn't just bought a house, we'd bought space, silence, safety, and most of all, belonging, the kind we didn't have to ask for. A month later, her sister called, said her parents were thinking of downsizing. I think they're a little, shaken, she added, her voice tiptoeing between guilt and pride. Dad keeps saying he didn't realize you were doing so well. I didn't reply right away. What could I say? He hadn't asked. She hesitated. It's weird. I think he feels embarrassed. I took a deep breath. Tell him he doesn't need to be, I said. I'm not. There was a pause. You're really okay, aren't you? More than okay. One morning, a letter arrived in the mail. Not a bill. Not a form letter. Handwritten, carefully folded. From her father. Eli, you've always been steady. I just never learned how to see that. You were building something in silence and I confused. Quiet with weakness, I was wrong. What you've done. It's more than impressive. It's honest. It's earned. It's rare. I may never fully understand the man you've become, but I respect him, and I'm proud my daughter married him. Michael, I read it once. Then again. Then I placed it in a drawer. Not to hide it, just to remind myself later, on the days when doubt might creep back in, that I hadn't imagined everything, that even the loudest voices eventually quiet when truth becomes undeniable. We hosted again that spring, not a formal dinner. Just a backyard gathering, neighbors, friends, a few clients who had become family. Her parents came too, this time with flowers and a pie, no subtle digs or awkward jokes. Her father sat on the patio, watching the wind move through the trees. Like he was listening to something he couldn't quite name. At one point, he pulled me aside. I owe you more than one apology, he said. I nodded. You've given it. He glanced back at the house. I used to think power came from how many people you could impress, but you've made me think it might come from how quietly you can stand when no one's watching. I smiled, not out of satisfaction, out of something gentler, growth. You don't have to understand everything, I told him. But I'm glad you see it now. He patted my shoulder. We didn't speak about it again. We didn't need to. That night, after the last guest left and the garden lights dimmed, my wife leaned into me on the porch swing. They've changed, she whispered. I shook my head softly. No, I said. We have. She tilted her head. Does it feel like revenge? I looked out at the home we built, at the garden blooming behind her, at the front gate that stood not as a barrier, but a boundary. No, I said. It feels like freedom. And we sat there, the two of us, not needing to say anything else. Because when the ones who once called you poor finally walk through doors, you opened, and see a life they never imagined you could build, and realize it didn't need their approval, their applause, or their permission. You're not just even, you're whole, and no one can take that back. Spring turned into summer. The garden bloomed in full wild color, just like we'd planned it would. Lavender, sage, hydrangeas by the fence line. It smelled like peace, like mornings without alarm clocks, like the air finally breathing back. We hosted more often now, not out of show, not out of pride, out of joy. Neighbors, friends, a few of her cousins who once couldn't remember what I did for a living now asked me for advice on investments, on starting something of their own. I never reminded them they hadn't asked before. That wasn't the point. One night, while setting the table on the back deck for a quiet dinner with two of our oldest friends, My wife said something that stayed with me. "You know what's different now?" she asked. "What?" "You don't walk like you owe anyone an explanation anymore." I paused, a napkin still folded in my hand. She was right. I used to carry myself like I was borrowing the room, like I had to compensate for the perception that I had less money, less name, less something I couldn't quite name but always felt. But now I stood differently. Not louder, just anchored. Around midsummer, her parents invited us to their home. Their real home, not the holiday place or the rental they used for appearances, but the smaller house they'd recently downsized into. It was humbler, quieter. There was no staff that day, no grand entrances, just them, a few garden chairs, and her mother offering iced tea with nervous hands. They had softened. I think life has a way of sanding down the edges of people who once cut with too much ease. We sat in their sunroom. My father-in-law, Michael, talked about retiring completely. He confessed they were considering selling off some shares of his remaining ventures. "We're not sure what we're holding on to anymore," he said. "The name's still there, but the spark, I think that left with our expectations." He didn't say it as a complaint. He said it like a man realizing he'd built something without roots. "And what about you?" he asked. "Are you content?" It was the first time he'd ever used that word in my direction. Content, like I was someone with the right to feel full. I took a long sip of tea before answering. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm not chasing anymore. Not applause, not permission, not even recognition. I'm just doing the work, and I like where it's leading." He nodded, as if he wasn't just hearing it, but feeling it, and that's when I knew. We were no longer living in different worlds. We were finally on equal ground, not because I had caught up, but because I had stopped trying to. A few weeks later, I hosted a company retreat. Nothing flashy, just a weekend at a quiet lodge with our team. We laughed, we cooked together. We stayed up talking about things that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or growth strategy. One of our interns, bright, sharp, observant, asked me over breakfast, "What was the moment you knew it had turned? That you weren't the underdog anymore?" I thought about it. Was it the house, the first profitable quarter? The moment Michael shook my hand and didn't let go too quickly? "No," I said finally. "It was the first morning I didn't check my reflection and wonder if I looked successful." "Enough," she blinked. I smiled. Success didn't change how I looked. It changed what I stopped needing to prove. Then came the interview. An online magazine had heard about what we'd built. Quiet, sustainable success. A company with 0 investors, no debt, and a reputation for taking care of people. They asked to do a feature. I almost said no, but something in me felt ready. Not to perform, just to tell the truth. At the end of the conversation, the reporter said, "You seem peaceful. Most founders your age are still grinding. You don't sound like you're chasing anything." I nodded. "I chased approval for a long time," I said. "Then I realized it's a moving target. You never hit it. So I stopped running." He laughed. "That's a hell of a quote." "It's not a quote," I said. "It's the receipt." Back home, we framed the article. Not in gold. Just a clean wooden frame that matched the house. It hung in the hallway, not the entryway. Not where guests could see it first. It wasn't for them. It was for me. For who I used to be. The man who sat silently at dinner tables where his name was the punchline. The man who nodded when called poor and bit his tongue because he didn't want to embarrass his wife. The man who once believed humility meant invisibility. That man didn't die. He just stood up one day, quietly walked out of the room, and began building something no one could take credit for but him. And now, he walks these halls in peace. No noise, no need, just more than enough. Late one afternoon in early autumn, I received a voicemail from Michael. Not long, not rehearsed, just 15 seconds of hesitation, then this. "Eli, I'd like to stop by. No agenda, just to see what you've built, if you'll have me." I played it once, then again. Then I left it alone. Because something about the voice on that recording told me this wasn't about status anymore. This was a man not a father-in-law, trying to close the distance between who he thought I was and who I'd quietly become. That Sunday, he came. Alone. No gifts, no wine, no stories, just him. His hands tucked awkwardly into his jacket, eyes scanning the front garden like he wasn't sure he was worthy to walk on the stones I laid. I met him at the door. He looked older than I remembered, more human. And for the first time, he didn't walk inside like he owned the room. He stepped gently, offered him a cup of tea. He nodded. In the living room, he sat on the edge of the couch like a guest who wasn't sure if he belonged. His eyes wandered the space, slowly, carefully, respectfully. "I'm sorry," he said at last, staring into his cup. "Not just for that dinner, but for all the small ways I measured you." I let the silence sit, not because I needed to make him wait, but because sometimes truth lands better when no one rushes to catch it. "I never understood how much work lives behind quiet men," he continued. "It took me too long to see that you weren't building noise. You were building roots." He looked up. "I thought I had to protect my daughter from settling for less. But I realize now, she married more." I felt something shift in the room. Not forgiveness, not vindication, just release. Like we had finally stopped holding the same rope from opposite ends. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. He nodded. "I mean it." I know. There was nothing else to say, and that was the beauty of it. That night, my wife and I sat on the back patio. The garden hummed with early autumn stillness. The last light of day caught the tops of the trees just before surrendering to dusk. She looked at me the way she did that night after the first family dinner, only this time with something softer in her expression. "You feel lighter," she said. "I think I am. Did you forgive him?" I thought about it. Then I shook my head. No. Her face tensed, but I smiled. "Because I didn't need to," I added. "He carried what he needed to carry, and I let go of what was never mine to hold in the first place." We sat there a while longer, not as the underdog and the girl who stood by him, just two people who had planted something with bare hands and watched it grow into peace. A week later, I hosted a dinner. No press, no proving, just people. Friends, mentors, a few new clients who felt more like family. Michael came too. This time with respect in his silence, he helped carry the plates, poured the wine, laughed at the right moments but never too loud. He didn't speak over anyone. He was learning, and that mattered more to me than any apology ever could. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, one of my oldest friends pulled me aside. "You ever gonna tell people what happened?" he asked. "How they treated you? What you came back from?" I looked around, at the quiet elegance of the evening, at my wife, laughing in the kitchen, at Michael, refolding the linen napkins without being asked, and I said, "No." "Why not?" "Because this," I nodded to the room, "is the answer." He smiled. "Still," he added, "hell of a story." "Maybe someday," I said. But I wasn't in a rush. Some stories don't need to be shouted to be felt. Some victories don't require spotlights. And some endings don't need closure. Just clarity. So if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever sat at a table where your worth was questioned by people who couldn't see past the surface, if you've ever been called less when you were quietly becoming more, then I hope this reaches you, not to inspire revenge, but to remind you, you don't need to prove anything, just build. Brick by quiet brick, and when the day comes, and it will, when they finally knock on your door, let your life answer for you, not with noise, with presence, and the kind of peace that says, "I'm no longer outside the room, I'm the one who built the floor."